Last night, I woke to the sound of scratching above me. At first, I thought it was just the house, settling, but then I saw it. A figure, clinging to the ceiling, its head twisted unnaturally to face me. It wasn't just watching, it was waiting. It was a night like any other, or so I thought. The house was silent, the air thick with that particular stillness that only exists in the dead of night. Waking when I heard it, a faint scratching noise. At first I thought it was the wind brushing tree branches against the roof, or maybe a mouse in the attic. But this sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch. I opened my eyes, staring into the darkness. The glow of my alarm clock cast faint shadows across the room, but everything else was still. I told myself it was nothing, that it would stop, and I rolled over, pulling the blanket up to my chin, but the sound grew louder, closer. I sat up, heart pounding, my ears straining to locate the source. That's when I noticed it wasn't coming from the walls or the floor. It was coming from above me. Slowly, I tilted my head back, my eyes searching the ceiling. For a moment, I saw nothing, just the usual dim outlines of the light fixture and a few cobwebs I hadn't noticed before. But then, something shifted, a faint ripple in the shadows. I squinted, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, but they weren't. A shape emerged from the darkness, crawling along the ceiling like a spider. It was thin, almost skeletal, its limbs elongated and impossibly flexible. Its movements were deliberate, slow, as if it knew I was watching and wanted me to see every horrifying detail. Then it stopped, directly above me. My breath caught in my throat as its head twisted, unnaturally, impossibly, until its face was looking straight down at me, faint light in the room. And then it smiled. The smile wasn't human. It stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp and uneven, like shards of broken glass. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stared, its smile widening as if it were amused by my terror. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from its face. My mind raced, searching for some explanation, but there was none. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was watching me. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The creature remained still, its body pressed against the ceiling, its long limbs splayed out like some grotesque insect. The only sound in the room was my own ragged breathing and the faint, wet clicking noise that seemed to come from it. Finally, my instincts kicked in. I reached for the bedside lamp, my hand trembling so badly I nearly knocked it over. The light flickered on, flooding the room with a warm glow. The ceiling was empty. For a moment, I thought it was over, that maybe my mind had conjured the entire thing. But then, I saw them, the scratches, thin, jagged lines carved into the ceiling, directly above where I had. And why? I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the corner of the room clutching a flashlight, my eyes glued to the ceiling. I was too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid to look away. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind sent my heart racing. When morning finally came, I convinced myself it was a one-time thing. Maybe I was sleep-deprived or hallucinating, but deep down I knew the truth. That smile, those hollow, shimmering eyes, they weren't figments of my imagination. They were real. The next night, I was prepared. I left every light in my room on, armed myself with a flashlight, and kept my phone within reach. Hours passed without incident, and I began to think I had imagined the whole thing. But just as I started to drift off, the scratching returned. That's it. This time, it was louder, closer. I forced myself to look up, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. And there it was, smiling down at me, its empty eyes shimmering with cruel delight. It didn't crawl toward me, didn't make any move to attack. It just smiled, as if it were savoring my fear. Panic set in. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the ceiling, the beam slicing through the shadows. The creature hissed, its body contorting as it scrambled away, retreating into the far corner of the room. For a brief moment, I thought I had won. But then it laughed. The sound was soft at first, a low, guttural chuckle that sent chills racing down my spine. It grew, louder, more distorted, echoing off the walls until it felt like it was coming from every direction. I screamed, throwing the flashlight across the room, desperate to silence the noise. And then, just like that, it stopped. The room fell silent, the creature gone. I sat there, trembling, trying to catch my breath. My flashlight lay broken on the floor, its bulb shattered. The ceiling was empty again, but the scratches were still there, a grim reminder that what I had seen was real. I didn't sleep for weeks after that. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the creature to return, and every night I heard it, the faint scratching, the soft laughter, the whisper of movement just out of sight. Even now, I can't bring myself to sleep in a dark room. I keep the lights on, the ceiling's clear of shadows, the soft, cruel laughter. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see it again, that smile, those empty, shimmering eyes, watching, waiting, because I know, deep down, that it's not gone. It never left. It's just waiting for me to look up again. The first night it returned, I convinced myself it wasn't real. After all, I hadn't seen it in weeks, maybe months. Life had started to feel normal again, but normalcy is fragile, and in my case, it shattered when I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I lay perfectly still, my heart racing, my ears straining to catch the sound again. Maybe it was a branch brushing against the house, or a mouse in the walls, but deep down, I knew better. I reached for my flashlight, the movement slow and deliberate, as though sudden motion might draw attention. I clicked it on and pointed it at the ceiling. It wasn't there. The light swept across the room, illuminating every corner. Nothing. Smile. It wasn't on the ceiling this time. It was in the corner, barely visible in the shadows. Two hollow, shimmering eyes gleamed faintly, and that awful, too wide smile stretched across its distorted face. "What do you want me to do, Bailey?" Base. My stomach turned as I realized it wasn't just watching me. It was waiting. Over the next few weeks, the creature's appearances became more frequent. It was never in the same place twice. One night, I'd find it clinging to the ceiling, its body twisted and unnatural. The next, it would be crouched in the corner of my room, its head tilted at an impossible angle. As it grinned, it never spoke, never moved toward me, but its presence was suffocating. The air grew heavy when it was near, and a faint, acrid smell like burnt hair seemed to follow it. I stopped sleeping, entirely, spending my nights with every light in my room blazing, and my back pressed against the wall. But the light didn't stop it. If anything, it seemed to embolden the creature. One night, I awoke to find it sitting on the edge of my bed. Its empty eyes glinted in the glow of the bedside lamp, and its smile stretched wider, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The creature tilted its head but said nothing. It simply stared, its smile frozen in place, as if my fear was the only answer it needed. The first mark appeared the morning after I saw it on my bed. I woke up drenched in sweat, my body aching as though I hadn't slept at all. When I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, I noticed it, a thin, jagged scratch running down my forearm. At first, I thought I had scraped myself on something during the night, but as the days went on, more marks appeared. Thin, claw-like scratches crisscrossed my arms, my legs, even my back. Some were shallow, barely breaking the skin, while others burned and throbbed like fresh wounds. I tried to tell myself it was me, that I was scratching myself in my sleep out of stress or fear, but deep down I knew the truth. The creature wasn't just watching me. It was touching me, marking me. The worst part was the whispers. They started faintly, just on the edge of hearing, like a breeze, through a crack in the window. But as the days passed, they grew louder, more insistent. "It's not over," they said. "You're not alone." The words weren't random. They were deliberate, calculated, meant to unravel me. And they were coming from the creature. Even when it wasn't there, I could hear it. Always. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The creature wasn't just haunting my nights, it was invading my days. Its smile appeared everywhere, in the reflection of a darkened window, in the corner of my eye when I glanced at a shadowed corner, even in the curve of a crack on the wall. I could see its grin mocking me. I stopped leaving my house, too terrified that it would follow me out into the world. But staying at home wasn't any safer. One evening as I sat on the couch, trying to calm my nerves, I saw it. Again, not the creature itself, but its hand, thin and skeletal, creeping down from the ceiling. It stopped just above my head, its clawed fingers twitching, as though deciding whether to strike. That's when I realized the truth. It wasn't just my fear feeding it. It was my very existence. The more I tried to fight it, to resist its presence, the stronger it became. The creature wasn't just haunting me. It was consuming me. Slowly, methodically, it was breaking me down. One night, I woke to find the creature standing at the foot of my bed. Its body seemed taller, more solid than before, as though it had grown stronger. Its smile was wider now, stretching across its face like a gaping wound. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. For the first time it spoke. Its voice was low and guttural, like the grinding of stones. "Invited me." The words sent a chill through my entire body. What did it mean? When had I invited it? I searched my memories, trying to piece together what I could have done to summon this thing. But no answer came. The creature tilted its head, as if savoring my confusion, and then it vanished, leaving behind only the faint smell of burnt hair and a deep, jagged scratch across my chest. I moved out of that house shortly after, hoping to escape the creature's hold. But the scratches followed me. The whispers didn't stop, and every night, I could feel its presence, lurking just out of sight. I've stopped sleeping altogether. The dark circles under my eyes are the least of my worries. Now, because I know the creature is waiting, watching. Its smile is burned into my memory, a constant reminder that it's not gone. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see it behind me, and sometimes, I see it in myself. Flicker of hollow, shimmering eyes, a faint curve of a smile that doesn't belong to me. I've come to understand the truth. The creature isn't just haunting me. It is me, or at least, it's becoming me. The final night began like all the others, with silence. The air in my room was heavy, thick with a dread I could feel in my chest. I hadn't slept in days, too afraid of what might be waiting when I closed my eyes. But exhaustion had its grip on me, and I felt myself slipping into that hazy space between wakefulness and dreams. Then the scratching started. It was different this time, louder, more insistent. My pulse quickened as I gripped the edges, my blanket, my eyes darting to the ceiling, but it wasn't there, not yet. The sound moved, and then, traveling across the walls, the floor, even the mirror in the corner, it was everywhere. And then, it stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against your eardrums, filling the space with the promise of something terrible. I felt it before I saw it. A presence, impossibly close, against my shoulder. I turned, slowly, and there it was. The creature wasn't on the ceiling anymore. It wasn't hiding in the shadows or crouched in a corner, gnarled like a tree warped by years of storms. Its hollow, shimmering eyes locked onto mine. And that smile, that impossible, too wide smile carved across its face like a grotesque wound. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice like the grinding of stone. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but I was frozen, paralyzed by the weight of its gaze. The air around me thickened, the room growing darker as the creature leaned closer. Its smile widened, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. "You invited me," it said, the words sending a shiver down my spine. And then it reached for me. I don't remember how I ended up on the floor. The room spun around me, the shadows pulsing, like a living thing. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the wooden floorboards as I tried to get away, but there was nowhere to go. The creature's smile stretched even wider, impossibly wide, as its limbs folded and twisted, pulling it closer to me. Its hollow eyes glimmered with a sickening light, and I felt its breath, cold, damp, and reeking of decay, against my face. "Oui, me?" I whispered, the words barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Its laughter filled the room, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You brought me here," it said. "And now, you'll never be alone." Its hand shot out, skeletal fingers wrapping around my wrist like iron. Pain surged through me, sharp and burning, as dark veins began to creep up my arm. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the echo of its laughter. End quote. When I woke, the creature was gone. The room was silent, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. From my wrist to my elbow, pulsing faintly, as though alive. I left the house that night, packing what little I could carry, and driving until the first light of dawn. But even now, miles away, I can still feel it. The mark burns when I'm alone, and the whispers haven't stopped. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I catch glimpses of its smile in the reflections of dark windows, in the curve of a shadow, in the corner of my eye. And I know it's still with me, waiting. If you dare, share this story. But remember, every retelling brings it closer to someone. Matus. New. Maybe even you. Are you sure you're alone as you finish this story? Or is something smiling down at you? End of section 29. Recording by Garris Anderson. Right now? I first noticed it last night. A shadowy mass just beyond the edge of the porch light's reach. It didn't move at first, just crouched there, low to the ground like a predator waiting to pounce. But then 2 glowing eyes blinked, their gaze locked on me. At first, I told myself it was just a stray animal, maybe a dog, but dogs don't have eyes that burn like that. They don't sit so still, so deliberate, for hours. Now, every time I peek out the window, it's there, closer, always watching, never blinking. Whatever it is, it's waiting for something. And I'm terrified, it's waiting for me. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of the shadows. I was standing in my kitchen, washing the last of the dishes from dinner, when I caught a glimpse of movement outside. Houses on the edge of a sprawling forest, where moonlight often dances through the trees, playing tricks on tired eyes. But this wasn't the moon, nor the wind swaying the branches. It was low to the ground, crouched just beyond the porch light's reach. At first I thought it was a stray dog. I squinted, leaning closer to the window, trying to make out its shape. That's when I saw its eyes. 2 glowing orbs, brighter and more piercing than any animal I'd ever seen. They weren't just reflecting light, they were generating it, like twin flames, smoldering in the darkness. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a raccoon, maybe exhaustion playing tricks on me. Turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs to bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. The next morning, I found scratches on the porch railing, deep, jagged gouges, as though something with claws had been testing the wood's strength. My stomach turned as I crouched down to inspect them. They were spaced too far apart to be from a dog or a cat. I shook it off. Maybe a bear had wandered close. It wouldn't be the first time wildlife had made its way into my property. That night, it returned. The same glowing eyes, the same unnerving stillness. This time, I tried to get a better look. The moment the bulb buzzed to life, the creature darted back into the shadows, faster than I could process. But I'd caught a glimpse, a flash of something unnatural. It wasn't fur-covered, like a dog. Its skin was slick and pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a gaunt, 4-legged frame. I'd barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent my heart racing. I tried to tell a neighbor about it, an older man who'd lived in the area his whole life. Probably just a coyote, he said with a dismissive chuckle. They're bold, but they won't hurt you. I wanted to believe him, but something about those eyes kept nagging at me. Coyotes don't have eyes like that. By the third night, the creature was closer. I could feel it before I even saw it, the oppressive way of its gaze pressing down on me as I locked the front door. When I peeked out the window, there it was, perched on the edge of the porch steps. My breath caught in my throat. It was bigger than I'd thought. Its limbs were unnervingly long, bending at unnatural angles. Its head tilted slightly as it stared at me, as if it were studying me, waiting for something. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing the nearest flashlight and a fireplace poker, I flung open the door and stepped outside. My hands shook as I aimed the beam of light at the creature. It didn't flinch. Its glowing eyes seemed to absorb the light, intensifying their fiery hue. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The thing didn't answer. Of course it didn't. Instead, it took a single step forward, its claws clicking against the wooden porch. I swung the poker in its direction, a feeble attempt to scare it off. The sound it made was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A low, guttural growl, laced with an almost human undertone, like a whisper layered beneath the noise. When the light returned a moment later, the creature was gone, but the porch was, marked deep grooves where its claws had been, and on the door, just inches from where I stood, was a smear of something dark and sticky, almost like tar. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I packed a bag and drove to a motel in the next town over. For days, I avoided going home, hoping the thing would get bored and move on, but even there, in the safety of the motel room, I couldn't escape its presence. I would catch glimpses of glowing eyes in the rearview mirror while driving. I'd hear the faint echo of its growl in the dead of night. Eventually, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I returned home, hoping for some semblance of normalcy, or deeper than ever, and the tar-like substance was smeared across every window. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me, but I know it's not going to stop. Every night, it comes closer, and every night, I feel its gaze growing heavier, as if it's pulling me toward something I can't understand. Now, as I sit here typing this, I can hear it outside, the clicking of claws on the porch, the low, rural vibrating through the walls. The power just flickered, and I know it's only a matter of time before it finds a way in. The day I inherited the house, I felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, curiosity, and an underlying unease I couldn't quite place. It had been years since I'd seen Uncle Raymond, the recluse of the family. He'd lived alone in this sprawling, weathered house at the edge of Blackthorn Forest. When the lawyer handed me the keys, he muttered something about the place being peculiar. I didn't think much of it then. The house itself was beautiful in a haunting sort of way. Its gabled roof and ivy-covered walls looked like something out of a Gothic novel. But as I stepped inside, the air felt heavy, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I chalked it up to the fact that it had been empty for months. Still, the sensation lingered. That first night, I heard it, a faint scratching sound at the back door. I dismissed it as an animal, perhaps a raccoon or a stray cat, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing. There, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I locked the door, checked the windows, and tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come easily. I felt as though something, or someone, was exposed, watching. The next morning I decided to explore the property. The house sat on several acres of land, most of it covered by the dense, ancient woods of Blackthorn Forest. I noticed something strange: symbols carved into the trees. They were crude and weathered, but their intent was clear. They were warnings. Later that day, I found Uncle Raymond's journal in the study. Its pages were filled with ramblings. Uncle Raymond had paid for school and lectures and traveling, and about the land, the forest, and a curse he claimed had plagued the family for generations. He wrote about a creature, something ancient and malevolent, that watched from the woods. According to him, the land was cursed after an ancestor had struck a deal with an unknown force. Itself had become tainted, and the creature bound to it would claim anyone who lingered too. I wanted to dismiss it as the delusions of a lonely old man, but the symbols on the trees and the scratching at the door suggested otherwise. That night, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was louder, persistent. I grabbed a flashlight and I went to the back door, my heart pounding. Slowly, I unlocked it and shone the light outside. Two glowing eyes stared back at me. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, burning like molten gold, set in a gaunt, pale face. The creature crouched low to the ground, its limbs unnaturally long and bent. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, it tilted its head, as if studying me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. The next few days were a blur of fear and research. I pored over Uncle Raymond's journal, desperate for answers. His entries grew more frantic toward the end, detailing his encounters with the creature. He described how it never crossed the threshold of the house, as though some invisible barrier held it back. He mentioned symbols, similar to those carved into the vine. She said trees that he had placed around the property to keep it at bay. But he also wrote about the cost of such protection. The curse grew stronger with each passing year, and the creature more relentless. One entry stood out. The only way to break the curse is to face it head on, but to do so is to risk everything. That night, the creature grew bolder. I heard it circling the house, its claws scraping against the walls. Triss's eyes seemed to pierce through the glass, locking onto mine. Wait, as it moved onto the porch. The symbols on the door frame began to flicker faintly, as though struggling to hold it back. Desperation overtook me. I couldn't live like this. Trapped, hunted, afraid. If Uncle Raymond's journal was right, I had to confront it. Shaking, the creature was waiting at the edge of the porch, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It let out a low, guttural growl as I approached. "Where are you here?" I demanded, though my voice trembled. The creature didn't answer, of course, but as I stepped closer I saw something strange. Its eyes weren't just glowing, they seemed to be filled with something. Memories. Faces. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that it carried the essence of everyone it had claimed. The confrontation didn't go as I'd planned, if it could even be called a plan. The creature lunged, its claws swiping inches from my face. I slashed wildly with the knife, the blade cutting through its translucent skin. It recoiled, letting out a sound that was both a scream and a laugh. But the symbols on the house had begun to flicker more violently, as though the creature's presence was overwhelming their power. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting the creature. I was fighting the curse itself, the land, the forest, the house. It was all tied together in a web of malevolence. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed a can of gasoline from the shed and poured it around the porch. As the creature advanced, I lit a match and threw it onto the fuel. Flames roared to life, engulfing the porch and spreading to the house. The creature screamed, its glowing eyes dimming as the fire consumed it. I ran into the woods, the firelight casting long shadows behind me. When I finally stopped, panting and shaking, I turned back to see the house engulfed in flames. The creature was gone, its eyes extinguished. But the symbols on the trees glowed faintly, as though the curse still lingered. Even now, as I sit in a motel far from Blackthorn Forest, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, destroyed. It was merely waiting, watching from the shadows, bound to the cursed land that had claimed my family for generations. If you ever find yourself near Blackthorn Forest, heed my warning. Don't stay too long. And whatever you do, don't make a deal with the darkness. It started with a wish. I was 14, desperate and stupid. That night, under the glow of a blood moon, I stood in the clearing behind my house and whispered my plea to the darkness. "Take anything," I'd said. "Just make it happen." I didn't know who I was speaking to, or what. I just wanted my father's illness to go away. I wanted him to live, carrying with it a low, guttural hum that almost sounded like laughter. Then, silence. By the next morning, my father was out of bed, his color returning, his voice strong. The doctors called it a miracle. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. After all, I wasn't even sure it had worked, but deep down I knew. Years passed. My father stayed healthy, and I moved on with my life. The pact, if it had ever been real, faded into the back of my mind. But the cost, as I would learn, was far from forgotten. It began subtly, years later. I was sitting in my apartment late one night when I noticed the eyes. At first, I thought it was a reflection in the window, a trick of the streetlights. But as I leaned closer, I realized they were outside, glowing faintly in the darkness. Two molten orbs, staring right at me. My stomach churned with an old, forgotten fear. I shut the curtains and turned off the lights, hoping it would go away. But when I looked again, the eyes were still there, unmoving, watching. Over the following days, they became a constant presence. No matter where I went, I'd catch glimpses of them. In the rearview mirror while driving, in the shadows of crowded streets even, in the reflection of my bathroom mirror. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just stress or sleep deprivation, but I knew better. The pact. It had come back to collect. The creature revealed itself fully one stormy night. The rain was hammering against my windows, and the power had gone out, plunging the apartment into darkness. I was fumbling for candles when I heard it, the slow, deliberate scraping of claws against the hardwood floor. My breath hitched as I turned toward the sound. It stood in the doorway of my bedroom, its gaunt frame illuminated by a flash of lightning. Its limbs were impossibly long, its pale skin stretched tight over bones that seemed to jut out at odd angles. And its eyes, they burned with a terrifying intensity, locking onto mine. "You made a deal," it rasped, its voice a guttural growl layered with whispers. "Now it's time to." I backed away, my mind racing. "I didn't know," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I was a kid. I didn't understand." The creature tilted its head, its grin revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. "Ignorance does not absolve debt." The creature lunged, its claws swiping inches from my face as I ducked. I grabbed the nearest, reaching a lamp, and swung it wildly, but it passed through the creature as though it were made of smoke. Desperate, I remembered the clearing where I'd made the pact all those years ago. I bolted forward, the door, the creature's growls echoing behind me. Rain soaked me to the bone as I stumbled into the woods, the glowing eyes always a step behind. When I reached the clearing, I fell to my knees. "What do you want?" I screamed into the storm. The creature loomed over me, its form shifting and twisting in the rain. I said, "Now, I'll take yours." With a final burst of defiance, I grabbed a jagged rock and carved the same symbols I'd once drawn into the dirt. The creature howled, its form dissolving into the storm. For now, I was free, but I knew it wasn't over. I first noticed the eyes while walking home from work. It was late, the streets empty except for the occasional flicker of a street lamp. As I passed the old park, I felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see a stray dog, or maybe some drunk, loitering in the shadows. But it wasn't a dog. It wasn't human either. Two glowing eyes stared back at me from the bushes, their light unnatural and steady. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. For what felt like an eternity, the eyes didn't move. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. No matter where I went, the glowing eyes were there, always at the edge of my vision, just far enough away to remain hidden. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, but the more I tried to ignore it, the closer the eyes seemed to get. I started asking around, casually bringing up strange occurrences to my coworkers and neighbors. Most of them dismissed me with awkward laughs or concerned looks. But one man or weary old neighbor named Bill hesitated. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he said, his voice low. I nodded, feeling a chill creep up my spine. "What is it?" Bill's face darkened. "Something old. It watches, waits, and when it's ready, it takes." That night, I barricaded myself in my apartment. Every window was locked, every curtain drawn. I even shoved furniture against the door for good measure. The creature didn't need a door or window to get in. Around midnight, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. I heard it then, the slow, deliberate tapping of claws against glass. My heart thundered as I turned toward the living room window. The glowing eyes were there, closer than ever, burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce my very soul. I tried to run, but the creature was faster. It materialized in front of me, its gaunt skeletal form, stretching impossibly tall. Its grin was wide and unnatural, its teeth glinting like knives. Why? Me? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The creature tilted its head, as if considering. Because you saw, it said simply. I don't know what happened next. One moment I was staring into its eyes. The next, I was waking up on the floor, drenched in sweat. Presence still lingered. My reflection in the window caught my eye, and I froze. My pupils were glowing. It started with a noise, soft and rhythmic, like claws tapping on hardwood. At first, I thought it was my neighbor's dog scratching at the shared wall of our duplex. But when I opened the door to tell them to keep it down, the hallway was empty. That's when I saw them, glowing eyes, low, to the ground, staring at me from the darkness at the end of the corridor. The sight sent a jolt through me, not just fear but something familiar. Those eyes stirred a memory I couldn't place. I slammed the door shut, heart pounding. It's just your imagination, I muttered to myself, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next few nights were restless. I heard the tapping again, this time closer. Each time I checked, the glowing eyes would retreat, but they never disappeared completely. They were always there, lurking in the shadows. Doorstep, a rusted dog tag. My breath caught in my throat as I turned it over. The name etched into the metal sent a chill down my spine. Buddy. Buddy had been my childhood dog, my best friend. He'd vanished one stormy night, when I was 10. I searched for weeks, calling his name until my voice went hoarse, but he never came back. As the nights went on, the memories grew sharper. Buddy waiting at the front door every day. After school, his wagging tail and excited barks. And then, the last memory, the night of the storm. I had locked him outside after a fight with my parents. I was angry, and I didn't let him in. The glowing eyes became more persistent. They no longer waited in the hallway. Now, they pressed against my windows, burned in my rearview mirror, and stared at me from the foot of my bed. One night, I woke to find the rusted dog tag on my pillow. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew I had to face whatever was haunting me. Clutching the tag, I whispered, "Buddy, is that you?" The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a low growl echoed through the room. What was left of him. His fur was matted, his flesh gaunt, and his mouth stretched into a grotesque snarl. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, falling to my knees. "I didn't mean to leave you out there. I didn't know." Buddy's form flickered, the glow in his eyes dimming for a moment. But then, he lunged. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my childhood bedroom. The storm outside rattled the windows, and a young voice, my voice, was shouting Buddy's name. Door and threw it open. There he was, soaked and trembling. I pulled him inside, holding him close as he wagged his tail. Gone. Happened. My life had become predictable. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat, sleep, repeat. Nothing ever changed, until the night I saw the eyes. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed them outside the window. Two faint glimmers, low to the ground, like tiny embers in the dark. At first, I thought it was a car's headlights reflected off the glass, but then they blinked. The next night, the eyes were back. This time, they were closer. I told myself it was just some stray animal, maybe a raccoon or a cat. But when I tapped on the glass to scare it off, the eyes didn't move. They just stared. After that, the eyes became a regular part of my routine. They were there every night, always in the same spot. I started to dread coming home, but there was nowhere else to go. No matter how much I tried to ignore them, they never went away. One evening, I worked late, hoping to avoid the eyes. But when I finally pulled into my driveway, they were already there, waiting for me. I felt my stomach twist as I realized something chilling. The eyes weren't watching the house. They were watching me. I decided to confront whatever was outside. Grabbing a flashlight and a baseball bat, I swung to the porch. The eyes didn't retreat as I shone the beam toward them. Instead, they moved. Closer, revealing a gaunt, skeletal creature with impossibly long limbs and pale, leathery skin. It moved unnaturally, jerking and twitching as it approached. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. Then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp. "You invited me." Confusion gave way to terror as I remembered the night weeks ago when I'd muttered to myself, "I wish something exciting would happen." I hadn't meant it, but the creature didn't seem to care. The creature lunged, its claws scraping against the porch. I barely managed to slam the door shut. Once predictable routine is shattered, replaced by a nightly battle for survival. And I know one thing for certain. I can never leave. The moment I step outside, it will be waiting. The accident should have killed me. The truck came out of nowhere, smashing into the side of my car and sending me spinning into a ditch. But somehow, I walked away without a scratch. The paramedics called it a miracle. I called it luck. At least, that's what I thought, until I saw the They appeared the first night after the crash, 2 glowing orbs at the edge of my yard. At first, I thought they were fireflies, but as they moved closer, I realized they were something else. Entirely. They didn't flicker, they didn't blink, they just stared. The next morning, I found deep claw marks on my front door. My neighbor's dog refused to come near the house, whining and pulling at its leash whenever we got close. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The truth hit me when I did some research on survivors' marks. According to an old legend, escaping death doesn't come without consequences. Something ancient, something hungry, claims those who cheat fate. The eyes grew bolder with each passing night. They moved closer, their glow piercing through the curtains. I tried leaving town, but no matter where I went, they followed. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door, stepping into the darkness. "Take me," I said, my voice trembling. The eyes moved forward, and a figure emerged. A shadowy, skeletal creature with claws that gleamed like steel. It smiled, its teeth glinting in the moonlight. As it lunged, I realized my mistake. It wasn't going to take me. It was going to take everything. As an investigator, I'd seen my share of gruesome crimes, but the recent murders in our town were unlike anything I'd encountered. The victims were always found alone, their faces frozen in terror, deep claw marks etched into their surroundings. The only clue? Witnesses claiming to. I'd seen glowing eyes before the attacks. I didn't believe in monsters, until I saw them myself. While combing through a crime scene late one night, I felt it, the weight of a gaze. Turning, I saw the eyes. They were low to the ground, watching me from the tree line. The locals called it the Watcher, an ancient being that passed judgment on those it deemed guilty. But guilty of what? As I delved deeper into the victims' lives, a pattern emerged. They all, mostly women, had reported being assaulted at some point within, had dark secrets. One night, I returned to my office to find a file on my desk. It contained my own secrets, things I thought I'd buried long ago, and beneath it, a single sentence, scrawled in blood-red ink, "Your next." The Watcher came for me that night. I tried to run, but its glowing eyes were everywhere, its growl echoing in my ears. When it finally cornered me, it spoke. Judgment is inevitable. As its claws closed around me, I realized the awful truth. You can't escape what you deserve. The air was suffocating, thick with the scent of damp earth and rot. My legs refused to move, my body pinned in place by the creature's unblinking, glowing eyes. Limbs grotesquely elongated, curling around the edges of my vision like a spider's legs. Its face, punctuated by a jagged, tooth-free grin that stretched impossibly wide. "You thought you could escape," it rasped, its voice layered with whispers that scraped against my mind. My breath hitched as the realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just been its prey. I'd summoned it. My desperation, my anger, my foolish words whispered into the night, had been the open door, and now there was no closing it. I tried to speak, to beg, but the words choked in my throat, as its hand, or claw, or whatever it was, slowly reached out. Its fingers were impossibly long, tapering into sharp, bone-like points that hovered just above my chest. The glowing eyes bore into me, and I felt the weight of them, in my very soul, as if it were peeling me apart, layer by layer. "You belong to me now," it hissed, and its claws sank into my chest, not physically, but deeper, into something unseen, something primal. My body convulsed, and the world around me blurred, only constant in the chaos. When I woke, it was quiet, too quiet. The house was eerily still, the air stagnant. My body ached, as if I'd run for miles. But there was no sign of the creature, no scratches on the walls, no glowing eyes in the windows. For a brief, fragile moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe it was gone. Maybe I had survived. Then I saw it. On the floor beside me, a single, charred handprint, burned into the wood. It wasn't just a mark. It pulsed faintly, as though it were alive. But the moment my fingers brushed the surface, a whisper crawled through the room, low and guttural. "Not yet." I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The whisper grew louder, multiplying into overlapping voices, each more desperate and chilling than the last. They weren't coming from the handprint. They were coming from inside me. I ran to the mirror, desperate to see if I was still whole, still me. But as I stared into my own reflection, something moved, not behind me, in me. The faint glow of two molten eyes blinked back at me from the depths of my pupils. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, sinister laugh. It's still with me, watching, waiting. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it stirring, clawing at the edges of my mind. I don't know how much longer I can hold it back, but maybe I don't have to. If you're reading this, you've already seen it, haven't you? Maybe not directly, but you've felt it, the weight in the air, the shadows that don't quite sit right, the feeling of being watched when you're alone. It's here now, with you, listening, waiting for its next invitation. If you dare, share this story, spread the word. Maybe, just maybe, it will give me more time. But remember, every retelling brings it closer, closer to you. Are you sure you're alone as you finish this story? Or are those glowing eyes already watching from the shadows?